Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This is something new that I'm looking forward to doing, and it's none other than the creepypasta iceberg. Now, for those who don't know what an iceberg is, it's basically a list of things that people know from the top to bottom and all that. Basically, the most common to least common things. It can be creepy, or it can be relatively harmless, and maybe just a thing that people forgot. But regardless of that, that's what we're going to be doing today. In which case, today we're going to be doing the creepypasta iceberg. Now, I have done a video on an iceberg before, the Super Mario 64 one, but that was awful. The audio was terrible, and I couldn't record anything else other than, the part 1. Part 2 was a complete mess up, so, yeah. But I'm kind of hoping this one's going to be a bit different. But yeah, that's going to do with the talking. Thank you for listening into this part, and yeah, let's get on to the actual iceberg now. Jeff the Killer. So in all honesty, there isn't much to say about Jeff the Killer other than he's the most popular creepypasta out there, and I'll be honest here, the story's kind of bad. It just doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. So, I mean, it's just kind of an overrated story. Slender Man. I don't want to say much to ruin the story, because although it's pretty old, it does have some good qualities to the story, but to put it simply, the Slender Man is a being that can most certainly be found in forests, disguising himself as a tree. He's also found in some photos, more or less pretty old ones, in a playground, just behind a couple kids, and out of view really. As for what his motives are, no one really knows. But regardless of that, I'd say Slenderman is still a pretty old and pretty good creepypasta of that. The Russian sleep experiment. During the days of war, a couple prisoners of war, being unknown, had been forced to participate in an experiment. The experiment was supposed to basically make their soldiers not need to worry about getting sleep, effectively creating super soldiers. The experiment started as anything would. They put in a special gas to make sure that the patients couldn't fall asleep. A couple of days at first just seemed normal, but after a couple of weeks, the patients started to grow more rapidly insane, losing their minds, killing each other, and eating parts of themselves. What remains to be the most darkest detail about this entire story, and what creeps me out the most, are the supposed last words of the patient. It started with one of the commanders saying to the now non-human subject, "What are you?" The subject then replied with a grin, or a smile, then saying, "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be freed. We are what you hide from in your beds at night, just waiting to be released every time you fall into a slumber." The commander, then horrified, shot him point blank in the head. What remained was a feeble whisper, simply saying, "So, nearly free." Squidward suicide. The last episode creepypasta Red Mist, or more commonly known as Squidward Suicide, is a lost episode creepypasta. The creepypasta goes as follows. An intern at Nickelodeon had been subjected to view one of the later episodes of SpongeBob. At first, everything was normal as it usually would be, but things began to get weird after a couple of minutes. Everything was all dark and gloomier than the regular episodes. It then cut to Squidward, who was now doing some form of performance. Everything was okay until he started playing his clarinet. The characters in the show then grabbed their ears in pain, seemingly due to the fact that the music was just god-awful. They then began to boo Squidward off stage. This then resulted in Squidward driving home and eventually killing himself, seemingly by shooting himself with a shotgun. Herobrine. The story of Herobrine is that the first person to encounter him originally got the game, but they had a really bad computer at the time, thus leading it to the fog in the game being turned all the way up, due to render distance and all that. However, in the fog at one point of the game, while just mining a tree, he found a weird figure in the distance. They knew it couldn't have been another player, which is why they screenshotted the image and sent it to other people to see if they could figure out who this was. Supposedly, it was supposed to be Notch's dead brother, but that was since debunked. However, Minecraft have made subtle jokes to Herobrine, going as far as to update the patch notes by saying Herobrine removed. Jane the Killer. Jane the Killer more or less is not necessarily a rip-off, I guess, but just an entirely different version of the already existing story, Jeff the Killer, in some ways, which doesn't really need me to explain any more about it. Dead Bard. This is another lost episode of creepypasta. Now, although this is one of the other well-known ones, it's still pretty good for what it is, though there are some errors in the story, but for the most part, this is how the story goes. An avid fan of the show The Simpsons eventually decides to go meet the creator. Currently, he was interested in some of the episodes, and basically, because he was able to meet him, he got handed some information regarding an old cut episode of some kind. The episode was overall pretty violent, with what appeared to be Bart falling out of the plane when they were moving, and as you can probably tell, dying on impact. This, as you can imagine, terrified the author, thus he then eventually forgot about the episode. Laughing Jack. Laughing Jack is pretty much one of the more gruesome creepypastas in this whole iceberg, or at least I think. The story goes as follows, being, at one point in time, a young boy had an imaginary friend called Jack. The mother first thought this was normal, until eventually he started doing things that he wouldn't do, and for some odd reason always getting loads of sweets and treats. The mother then asked out of curiosity where he was getting all these things from, and naturally the child said that it was Jack who was doing it, but the mother didn't believe him, and as you can probably tell, got pretty angry at this. Nevertheless, the days went on, and eventually the family dog had mysteriously died. It was cut open, and candy was stuffed inside. The same would later happen to the little boy, as unfortunate as it was. The mother burst in one night trying to help her son by also avenging him and killing the strange, laughing clown. As soon as he arrived, however, he quickly disappeared, and unfortunately the mother then stabbed straight through, piercing her son still beating hard. Shortly after, the mother then called the police, and naturally there was no trace of anything else at play. All that was really there was the mother holding a bloody knife that stained with her son's blood. The mother was then put in a psychiatric ward. Perhaps the creepiest final detail about the story is when the mother said that some nights she can faintly hear a mocking version of Pop Goes the Weasel playing throughout the cell. The back rooms. I've already done a video on the back rooms in liminal space, but to put it simply, what it is something that exists outside of reality basically for the back rooms. If you want more information, feel free to check out those videos. SCP Foundation. If you guys like, I might do a more in-depth video related to the SCP Foundation in a different video, but to simplify it and what it is, it's basically just a foundation that specializes in keeping humans safe and away from extraterrestrial beings. The AU Wookiee, basically what this is a more creepy version of the popular singer Michael Jackson. I don't really know how this correlates into the creepypasta community, but oh well. Kendall Cove. Kendall Cove is more or less a bit of a lost media creepypasta. It deals with our main characters discussing this old TV show on a blog they created, remembering how creepy and disturbing it was. One of the creepy things about the show was one of the villains called the Skin Taker, which basically, as you can imagine, took the skin of other people. Perhaps the most creepiest thing about the show, however, is one episode in which all that could be heard was just crying and screams of all the characters in the show. After the author discussed more about the show on the blog, he then decided to leave the blog for a bit and go to his parents and ask why they let him watch that horrible and creepy show. The author's parents simply replied by saying, "Oh, I'm surprised you remember that show. I used to find it funny how you said, 'I'm going to watch Kendall Cove now, Mom,' as you tuned on the TV and watched dead air for 30 minutes. You had quite the big imagination with your little pirate show." No End House. The story of No End House is where two friends originally heard of a challenge. If they could get through all rooms within the No End House, they would have been granted a cash prize. The first couple of rooms he went in seemed to be normal, just cheap Halloween decorations to try and scare someone. But eventually it got so real and so creepy that he eventually just left. After he left, the number 10 was etched into his door, and that's when he realized that there truly was no end to No End House. The Rake. As the legend follows, the Rake is a creature that was basically on Earth since the very beginning. As far as documents go back to, people had reported seeing the Rake many times. Perhaps the most notable one is one of a family that one night, unfortunately, happened to stumble across this strange and disturbing creature. The thing simply sat on the edge of the bed as it slowly began to move away from them, and then crept into the hallway, and then eventually breaking into their daughter's room and killing her tragically. The last words that she muttered were, "He is the Rake." The Midnight Game. The Midnight Game is an old pagan ritual, and to perform it you need to complete the following steps, mainly writing your name in blood, and then waiting till obviously midnight. You will then summon a spirit into your house known as the Midnight Man, and that's when the game begins. The game ends in the early morning, and your only goal is to not get caught by the Midnight Man. If you do, it will create an hallucination of your worst nightmare and basically rip out all your organs one by one, killing you. Tailstall Curse. The Tailstall Curse is more commonly known as just the Sonic R creepypasta, the Tailstall. Basically, how the creepypasta goes is that one day, a father brought a new game for his son on one of his new Sega consoles, the game being Sonic R. Initially, the son was very excited by it and played it a lot. As a matter of fact, it got to the point where he very quickly completed the game. However, one particular occasion stood out to him when he was playing as the Tailstall. One night, he went into his son's bedroom and saw that the game was still on. So, considering he was curious, he decided to play the game for himself. He selected Tailstall at the character selection screen and decided to play tag. After he tagged the characters in a specific order, ranging from after tagging Eggman and Metal Sonic, and then Metal Knuckles, and then finally Supersonic, he was then met with a red screen. Just completely red, with the only other thing on the screen being Tailstall. The father then went back to bed, thinking maybe it was a bit of a strange thing to have there, especially in a kid's game like that, considering it probably scares someone. But nevertheless, he took a break, went to his room, and was almost about to fall asleep, when he could hear scratching at his bedroom door. Thinking it was his son, he then said for him to go back to bed. But after the scratching kept happening, he got up, and only then, when he opened the door, did he see a tail-style plushie at the very bottom of the door. Fallout 3 number station. In Fallout 3, if you do a certain number of events, you'll be able to perhaps unlock a mystery within the game. Basically, if you go to Galaxy News Radio and kill 3 Dog and complete another certain number of events in the game, you will eventually hear what appears to be strange numbers being muttered by 3 Dog himself, in a more unenthusiastic tone of voice than he usually would with the game. Also, for some reason, people say this predicted real-life events like an oil spillage, but that's as far as I know. Also, some people think this is a direct way for 3 Dog to kind of taunt the player and contact him from beyond the grave. Marble Hornets. As far as I can tell, Marble Hornets is just a regular creepy YouTube channel. I don't really know what else to say about it. JVK1166.esp. JVK is a creepypasta about the Elder Scrolls series, more specifically Elder Scrolls Morrowind. The creepypasta starts with our main protagonist saying that there's a mod going around on some old forums. People simply just referred to it as JVK, except the only thing about it was the game was almost unbeatable, with the first thing being the fact that you often lost health quite rapidly. Also, some of the main quest NPCs would also be dead, obviously making it so that you couldn't play the actual game. Also, some of the other NPCs in the game would always say look to the sky at certain points in the night. But perhaps by far the creepiest thing is the new enemy added to it, simply known as the Stalker. Once the player dies, the Stalker will crawl over the dead body of the player in a spider-like motion. NES Godzilla. NES Godzilla is the creepypasta story about a person who wanted to relive the classic days and basically play all the games they played as a child, one of those games being Godzilla for the NES. The protagonist quickly finds a good copy of Godzilla for the NES, however, after getting it, quickly realizes that something is off. The last boss fight that the player has is with a strange creature and entity simply known as Red. Red simply kills Godzilla, leaving the author questioning what happened. Polybius. Polybius is the story of a crazy old arcade machine which is basically responsible for many deaths. The rumor goes is that once anyone plays it and they get a high score on the machine, they will instantly be greeted with death a couple days after. Also, it's commonly thought that this used to be some kind of government experiment. From what I can say, I have to say that this for me is false, but then again, there is that possibility. The strangest security tapes I've ever seen. A new guy by the name of Jeremy recently started working at a gas station nearby a relatively rural area. After a while of working there, things began to go missing. His boss naturally thought it was Jeremy, so they agreed to take a look at the cameras. The protagonist quickly does check the cameras later, finding that everything's normal, mainly just a bunch of different customers coming in and buying all the things they wanted. However, after a while of this loop of the same customers coming in, buying the same things, the author then decided it was time to take a break, or the protagonist, and shortly after, he came back again, but this time he was greeted with a more familiar sight of his co-worker Jeremy staring at him, smiling rather creepily at the camera. But he wasn't just staring at the camera itself, he was almost looking in at our protagonist, as if he was kind of showing off to the protagonist. So only a couple weeks or so passed by, or days rather for that matter. Eventually, he show the boss. The two were both freaked out, thinking what the hell was going on, and eventually, after a while, they think they finally resolved it. Then something weird happened, something strange. A new person, named Jeremy, started working at the gas station. Hey everyone, I just want to give you a quick thanks for watching, making it to the end of this iceberg. If you did enjoy, then thank you so much. As I said, I really appreciate it. I'm aiming to get part 2 out very soon as well, just after this. Also, I've got a couple Halloween videos planned already. You're gonna like them, I think. So yeah, but thanks for watching again. I love you all. See you later. Goodbye.